blind man cross the road, trying to make the other side, baby. Ever seen a young girl growing old, trying to make herself a bride? So what becomes of you, my love?
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Pray that he's still out there, somewhere.
Well, it is so wonderful to be with you today. A very warm welcome. Today is special for two reasons. One, because this is, I don't know which one gets more precedence really, but because we're on our new platform, Eating Wild Honey and Locusts, and on that platform, let me start again and welcome you. Sorry for that little technical issue that we had there. So I just want to say hello and welcome to our new platform, Eating Wild Honey and Locusts. Sorry about that. So it's wonderful to be with you. Look, let's just go forward with it. You know, this is the first time that we're on the channel, so there may be a couple of technical hitches, but the point is we are no longer on an uncensored platform. We've got we're censored platform. We're on an uncensored platform where now we can't be contained with our content. We'll continue being on YouTube. We'll continue being on Brighton and Facebook, but this is where we will have most of our content, all of our content, alongside the UK Cepher that's being developed, where you can find all of Dr. Stephen Pidgeon's material from Cepher and his Thursday YouTube presentations and what we do on a Thursday and a Friday. And that is expanding. In the short time that we have available to do these type of things, we're going to be bringing so much more content that is relevant to you, which is a scriptural basis as well as what's happening in the world, and bringing them and holding them together with that type of weight. So it's exciting to be on this domain with you. Thank you. I can see you coming in to the different channels, the different destinations, but also we are actually together in the same room, in the same country, and it's fantastic. Dr. Stephen Pidgeon and his wife, Stephanie Pidgeon. We have the team, Paul Barry is here, and Cheryl Rowe, and Stuart Orman and his wife. We're all here in Wales together, and we're part of the team for this week. And Dr. Pidgeon is here for a month of mission, a month of research. And next week, we are having the gathering, a UK gathering, fellowship gathering, led by Dr. Stephen Pidgeon for 3 days. It's been designed that way because many of you had said, we don't want just one day for a few hours. We want it where it can be personal, where it can be relational, and over a couple of days. So what we've done is we have hired the Lutterworth Town Hall from the 23rd September all the way through to the 25th of September. We probably got far more hours than we require, but that's so that there can be a time of fellowship, communication, worship, talking, you know, where you can just be one-to-one with one another. And then we've got specific things. Dr. Pidgeon on the first day is going to be leading us in worship, all 3 days actually, and then he's going to be praying with you, leading you into the Ruach, if that's what you want, anointing and laying on of hands, or just praying with you, speaking into your lives, addressing us corporately. And on on Saturday, he will continue with that. Then we've got baptisms. So many of you have asked to be baptized or to renew your baptism this time around as you become Torah pursuant, and you want to do that with Dr. Pidgeon. And then we have the Feast of Trumpets on Sunday. And that's going to be a magnificent time of declaration and worship and service together. So I'm sure Stephen can give more meat to all those 3 days, but really now you can just walk into any of those days. I only ask you to register so we know who to expect. Only thing where you do need to let us know that you want to be baptized in advance if possible, because of numbers and safeguarding. So I need to let the leisure centre know how many people we have, and just so that they have your name. Other than that, you can just turn up, but it's always great to know who is coming. So we're really excited about this because it's an instrumental time in our nation, in the United Kingdom. It's instrumental, the time that we find the Cepher team, Dr. Pidgeon, coming here, same as when he was poised to come into this country 2.5 years ago. We were entering into lockdowns. So we need to look at it from that perspective. And it is really important this time round that we make declarations and that we start to proclaim, and we understand for ourselves how to authenticate and how to fluently say and be an ambassador of Yahuwah, of Yahusha, of the Ruach, and why those names are correct, and why we must declare them, and why there is power and there's authority in those names. You know, so it's things like this that when you come together corporately, you can be blessed, not only blessed, but anointed, moved, commissioned to go forward in this new way. And that's really important because we're all at different degrees in our walk in Torah and pursuing that. So, you know, it's exciting. It's really, really exciting here. Now, I want to introduce Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, and then we have a guest who I'm going to ask Dr. Pidgeon to introduce. But it's been fantastic being with Stephen this few days in Wales. Welcome, Dr. Pidgeon. It's wonderful to have you with us today.
Well, hi, Jessica. Yeah, it's great to be here. I have to tell you, it's also fantastic to also be at Scott Bennett's house, where, you know, where he has the grand piano and everything. I haven't had a chance to play it yet, see if it's into, but it's just wonderful. Yeah, terrific.
Oh, it's exciting. We've actually had a really full day, haven't we?
Yes, we have. And it's been terrific. Every little thing that's happened so far, just a few days that we've been here, has just been terrific. I mean, when we first got here, we were able to go to a Sabbath Torah meeting and to spend some time with some people who were, deep into the Hebrew.
Yeah.
And we had an opportunity to spend time with them and have some very meaningful discussions, of course, about what's so greatly on the heart of everybody here in the UK, which there is a great deal of concern.
Yeah.
And it's coming from all quarters. Anybody who believes anything, they still have a great concern about what's coming here. And the question in everyone's mind is, okay, we're concerned, we're afraid, we're worried about this, we've got that. But in each person's heart, there is the question, which is what? What do we do? What do we do?
Yeah.
Right? And so with this being said, what do we do? And the answer is that we begin to talk about this. So I had some terrific discussions. We were initially at Glastonbury. On Sunday, we were at Glastonbury. And we had the opportunity to blow the shofar in the heart of the Abbey and to proclaim the name of Yahweh over that whole Abbey. And of course, the first thing that kind of comes out of that in proclaiming the name of Yahweh is that the truth begins to come forward.
Yeah.
Not just the mythology or the legends. And so we met a woman there who was actually kind of an expert on what they call the holy thorn. Now, this is the tree that blooms on Christmas and Easter, where the claim is made that this was planted by Jospeh of Arimatha and it grows back.
Wow.
Well, upon further research and talking with her, we find out that number one, the plant is not indigenous to the UK at all. Number two, in order for the plant to grow here at all, it has to be grafted onto what they call the blackthorn, the black hawthorn tree, which is indigenous to the UK. Number three, it wasn't brought here by Jospeh of Arimatha, more likely brought here by the Knights Templar, the Crusaders. And so this is the 11th, 12th, or 13th century when this thorn first appears. So it really is not, the long and the short of it is that the actual horticultural facts behind this holy thorn does not support the notion that this was Aharon's rod in the hand of Jospeh of Arimatha, planted in Glastonbury. And so, but we had the chance to do that. We went and, of course, we climbed the Tor, which is a hill overlooking all of Somerset that appeared to be in place before Glastonbury ever was.
Yeah.
Because in the Somerset Flats there, we see that there was salt water present there for many, many years, for centuries, up to the 9th century. There was water present there. So it's an unlikely site for JOA. And so, of course, we came down here to Cardiff, and we had the chance to spend time with one of our guests is going to be with us
Yeah.
today, which is the very acclaimed Welsh historian and the one who writes in Britain's Hidden History, book publisher. And I like to say he's a great friend of mine. Of course, we published his book, Cumberglyphics, Ross Broadstock.
Hello.
And Ross is not only a great author, but he's also a YouTube superstar in his own right, having done hundreds and hundreds of hours on YouTube. And Ross and I have spent some time doing some videos. And yesterday was yet another visit to the Bishop of Jerusalem's grave at the old in Sophia Gardens at the old Black Priory Abbey there, which was originally the site of the island of Avalon. And because and again, this history kind of goes away very quickly. You have to remember we're talking 2,000 years of water under the bridge, so to speak. And so we see the River Taff coming down on one side of the park there at Sophia Gardens near the Cardiff Castle. But at one time that river forked and created an island right where this abbey was built. Mm. And where the river forked, this created the island that we believe was Avalon. And of course, one of the things that you see, this is one of the indicia you can kind of tell when something is honing in on the truth. People try to cover it up. The stuff that's not true, well, that stuff can come out all day long. We can put that up in neon lights. We'll run it up in Times Square, whatever it takes. It's not true. Mm. Tell it all we want. But when you have something that's true, well, that's a different issue. That has to be covered over. That has to be buried. That has to be, put away. Can't talk about it. To give you an example, the video I did on YouTube, the first video I've done in over 5 years, that was taken down on the prophetic timeline. And somebody asked me, why did they take down your prophetic timeline? I said, I don't know. It must have been true. That's all I could figure, So when we got to the grave of JOA, the tomb has been covered over with concrete, so you can't see the face of it. And the historic relics that we were looking at, including the relics we've looked at today, there's some very important relics there, which I'll let Ross introduce. When we looked at those relics, you can see they're eroding. They're eroding. The Bishop of Jerusalem's tombstone, which 3 years ago I read the Latin, and it was easily read all the way to the bottom of the stone. Wow! Now the bottom third of the stone is almost unreadable because it's decayed so quickly. The church that we walked in Llandud Major, many of the murals on the wall, which I was very easy to see 3 years ago, they've lost almost all efficacy in terms of being able to see them or to describe them. So it's alarming how quickly this history is. But Ross, why don't you tell us about? We went out to the sheep's field, where we did not meet the unfriendly shepherd.
All right. Yes. Well, that's yeah. So, thank you very much for the invitation. It's been great couple of days hanging out together and doing some singing, some fellowship, and visiting sites. And we've got some more things to do in the time you're over here. And I'm very thrilled to be on the program. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
and the big build-up. Thank you.
Glad to have you, Ross. It's such a pleasure to work with you. We get together, and of course, you and I have the same spirit, which is one where we begin to share the history, and then how do you get us to shut up? That's the big problem.
It helps that both of you have great voices, operatic voices, both musicals, so we've had some great fellowship as well, isn't it? And it's great that you can just be there to support one another and lead us in. So it's brilliant all round.
Yeah, when Dr. Pidgeon said I got hundreds of hours of YouTube, he just meant the first video. That was the I do some short ones. The field we went to today is called Caer Mead. So it's got Caer, Caer, which is like sometimes it means the castle, but you mean the palace. So it's the place. Caer Mead, that's the name. And it's a fascinating, it's a well-documented site. And back in the 19th century, it was excavated because there's a lot of excitement because they found these limestone blocks, very bright, shiny white, beautiful. So you could see quite a lot of the walls. It was still very visible, this palace. It filled in a bit with earth, but the walls in that were fantastic. And they'd been quarrying the limestone for the local lime furnace. And they were so pleased. It was so much easier to use because it had already been cut and all the bad stuff taken out, and it burned beautifully to make cement. So that wasn't very good. But anyway, the the archaeologists went in there, great excitement. They found a Roman palace. This happens all the time. All you've seen is some blocks. It must be Roman. The problem was the records, the British history records, tell you that it's not Roman. It's a British palace, and it's made by a Welsh king. We know most about it, but no, it's got to be Roman. So they dig down, very excited, big archaeological dig. There's since been 2 more. Then they get to the bottom level. Oh, hang on a second. The artwork doesn't look Roman. They got the marble, the sort of fresco floor, the tiles. It doesn't look Roman. The images are all wrong. It's the wrong history. It's clearly not Roman. It's British. So as Dr. Pin just explaining, so what you do in this wonderful quest for the truth, what do you do in a situation like that? Well, you fill it back in again. It literally filled it back in, all the mud back in. It's almost impossible to get the photographs. We did find them. There is a short video up on my channel, so about 7-8 minutes, showing how it's been done. And it has been visited again since, and the same sort of thing. There's a quick look and then cover it back up and hide the real story. And this goes on all the time. It's extremely frustrating and bewildering to me to see it, how it can be so barefaced.
Yeah. So before we go any further, could you please tell us the name, your YouTube channel, how people can access that?
Oh, right, yeah. If you see my name there, it's, hang on, there you go, Britain's Hidden History, Ross. Britain's Hidden History, one word.
Okay.
And it should come up, yeah.
Okay. You know what's intriguing, and this is open to both yourself and Dr. Pidgeon, the fact that Wales and this country has so much biblical lineage, heritage that we were not aware of. And now, because of the programs that we, from day one with Dr. Pidgeon, have been doing here, people are beginning to realize, they're curious, even about the Holy Land. Is it really the Holy Land as it's reported? I mean, we're looking at that today. I'd love you both just to bring in that link and show the heritage of the UK. This will be very new to many people, but this is what they're intrigued about, especially for this month that we have this Cepher mission here. So I really would love you both to really focus on that and speak to the UKians here and bridge in these gaps and actually what our heritage is biblically.
Do you want me to start there? Where I would start is the song that we were singing just yesterday. Is a big clue with and did those feet in ancient times, because it's been known about. Did the ancient feet walk upon England's green and pleasant? England's pleasant pastures green. And this is a reference going back to this knowledge that there is the ancient stories. And the legends have been turned and twisted a bit. If you go the southwest, there's talk there that Jesus went to Britain as a child with his uncle Joseph of Arimatha. And this seems to be a partly remembered legend. There's always some truth in this, because the Cornwall of the southwest was the main source of tin for the Bronze Age. Now, it depends how much you want to go into this. If you look at writers like Comyns Beaumont, they claim that Edinburgh was Jerusalem, and the whole story got moved from Britain to the Middle East and the rule of Constantine to bring it nearer to his capital. But that's a big thing to take in, Pardon?
Ross, let's stop there for a second, because that whole theory about Edinburgh being the original Jerusalem.
Yes.
There is a substantial body of thought that talks about this. And I just want to reflect on 2 things real quickly. One is that the evidence in terms of the construction of the pyramids in Egypt, when you look at the Giza Plateau, the second pyramid is not exactly aligned with the first. There's an error there, if you will. You can try to call it an error. But that error, in fact, creates an algorithm. That algorithm has an expression, and that expression points to, in its ultimate geometric conclusion, points to the very same idea that you're talking about, that Edinburgh was the original Jerusalem. Now, when you look at that idea, we know that Constantine, who was the founder of the Catholic Church in 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea, came out of York. His mother was born in York. He was born in York. And he left York and took his leadership into the Roman Empire, where initially he intended on declaring himself God, but he operated under the key role. And we saw some evidence of the key role in some of the artifacts we saw today. But he operated under the Key Road, and under the Key Road, he was exploiting a different kind of idea than that which was being practiced in Wales and in Cornwall and in that area in the very first and second century, and even coming into the third century, or rather even into the fourth century, you had this practice taking place that was the faith brought by Joseph of Arimatha, which I say was the father of Miriam, not the uncle, but rather the grandfather of Mashiach, the grandfather. But Constantine takes this story and he says, well, look, I have a vested interest in creating my capital city distinct from this vulnerable city called Rome, where Carthage had already burned the place once. And it was not a very well defendable site. And he could move over here to the city named after his own name, very defendable site. And it proved to be the case. That side of the empire lasted 1,000 years longer than the western side. But it was in Greek orientation. So you see a number of things happening. One, he insists on having the New Testament crafted in Greek. This was a big project. He wanted 50 copies, handwritten copies from Eusebius in the 4th century delivered to Constantinople. And they were. And from there, thousands of copies were made and registered in the basement of the Hagia Sophia Church, there, which was the most important church in all Christendom. It preceded the Vatican by many years. So we see that Constantine has this interest in, let's recite all of this information here under the Greek control of Constantinople due north from this Palestinian area. And we'll call these areas Jerusalem. We'll call these areas, all of the sites that are taking place in the Gospels. And there's some evidence to the fact that this is abnormal. For instance, the evidence of walking on the water. Now, this description of this kind of, the problems that were happening with the boats and in the sea and so on and so forth, inconsistent with this lake that they call the Sea of Galilee, which they don't call it, it's not called the Sea of Galilee, and even in Israel today, they call it the Harp, it's the Lake of the Harp. But it is consistent with the waterways off Cornwall, very consistent with what you would see there, right? And so we see some things here that are kind of very interesting. Now, also, when we talk about, for instance, Galatia, when Paul says, I'm going to go preach to the Galatians. Well, did he go into Turkey at some area that they try to call in the middle of the country Galatia? Or was he in that area where also known as Galatia, the area of Gaul, which would be northern Spain, western France, and which would later become Brittany, right? And was this the place where he preached? So all of these things have some serious questions. When you get to the book of Revelation, they don't talk about the situs of the crucifixion being Jerusalem.
Now this is important.
They instead say Egypt and Sodom and the place where Mashiach was crucified. They don't use the name Yerushalayim.
Wow.
Oh, I didn't know that. Right. Okay.
So anyway, I didn't want to interrupt it, but that is very interesting. Now, you say there's a great deal of history associated with this idea that Edinburgh was the original Jerusalem.
Yeah, it was a big thing. I mean, I'm still in the process. I've got the books here somewhere of Comyns Beaumont was the writer. It's Comyns, Beaumont. And he was writing this stuff back in the 1950s and 60s. And it became quite popular at the time. He was quite well known. He was a former journalist, and so he's got a Fleet Street background. And he'd been discovering all this. And the amount of information to support the Bible accounts matching Edinburgh far more than something in the Middle East. You give more background than I'm aware of. It's not an area I've studied in depth yet. It's pretty high on my list, though. It changes everything. It's a big thing to take in. But I'm interested to hear what you were saying about it. But if you look also at the very place names in Edinburgh, you will find they match the Bible. And I'll have to read this properly and get in more detail, but what you can see is certain walks that were taken, the roads there. For example, the distance to the fishing and the fish markets. All these kind of things seem to make a lot more sense when it is moved there. And what he then did was he considered the people sort of between the walls, if you like. So you have what's called Hadrian's Wall, even though it's not Hadrian's, but this is the way history works. That's how people know it. The supposed Hadrian's Wall between the sort of north of England and Scotland. And then another 20, 30 miles or 40 miles further north, you've got what's called the Antonine Wall. And his theory is that the Jewish people were between those two walls. And that's why there were two walls, to protect them from the south and the north. And if you visit Hadrian's Wall, as I did a few weeks ago, you'll find it doesn't make any sense to be the usual idea that the Romans built it to keep the people from the north out. It would work better the other way around. But that, again, it's a problem with these subjects. They're all huge topics, aren't they? Which is why we've got so much to talk about. But that's the overall background of what Collins Beaumont was showing. And then he would say that, like you mentioned, York, as you pointed out, Constantine's from there. Helen, his mother, was a British queen from the British royal family. And this is the curious thing that Wilson and Blackett point out in great detail, is that for that period after Hadrian, so Hadrian comes to Britain around in the 120s, and this war with the British is not going anywhere. It's like a Vietnam situation. It's getting bogged down. It's costing them a fortune. And Hadrian has a big problem because he has no heirs, no descendants to follow him. He needs royal blood to continue being the emperor. Now, the image that we have of Rome as this massive thing running out of one city, and they've got this technological edge, and they can build roads, and they've got better weapons, and they can beat everybody. This image starts with Gibbon, with his decline and fall of the Roman Empire. We're going back to the 17th and 18th century. And this was when the British were building their worldwide empire, which was indeed based on that. It had huge technological advantages. It had guns and better cannons and trained armies. They had railroads. Everything was run out of London. And they had this was their image of how an empire would run. And therefore, they created an image that the Roman Empire must also have been run the same way. Whereas actually, it was not. If you go through even the mainstream history, it would break up into three. You'd have the Western Empire, the Eastern Empire. There'd be overthrows, coups and usurping. You've got 1 year where 4 emperors are killed and the army's in control. It's nothing like the British Empire if they paint a picture that it is. So what Wilson and Blackett has shown is that you come in the 120s, Hadrian's got no heirs because the Romans are all busily killing each other. But you do have Roman-descended blood in Britain. And what we can hopefully come on to as well is holy blood in the British royal family. So Claudius marries off one of his daughters into the British royal family. So he's got his own connection there. And Hadrian comes to South Wales to make an agreement. And in Welsh, the old word for to agree something is dydd, divio.
What's the word?
D-Y-D-D. So it's dydd. This might ring a bell in a second, okay? Because dydd is the agreement. So diddo is to make an agreement. Now, if you have the place of the agreement, you get Cardiff, which is Cardiff, the place of the agreement. Cardiff. They try and say Diddio means day fort or something, but actually it's the place of the agreement. And after Hadrian dies, you can then draw an exact parallel. And the emperors, who are supposedly based in Rome, you can identify them as British kings, and you can see the stones. And like you've mentioned, we know that Constantine's in York. You've got memorial stones with their names on, dotted throughout the UK, a lot of them in Wales, but also the north of England, various places. And this is where the empire was being run from. So in many ways, the Romans are actually the British. The term Roman is being massively overused. So you get a very different kind of situation when you think of British kings born in Britain. And on the other, and just to add one little thing on that, let you come back in on it, is that the strange idea, it's a very dangerous idea, really, that they could say, if you trace back, say, far enough, they might have a Roman great-great-grandfather or something. But if they're then generation after generation after generation after generation living in Britain, how long before they become British? It's very dangerous. It sounds a lot like the one drop kind of argument, just go, one drop in your distant past is Roman, therefore you're not British, you're Roman. So if an emperor comes and marries a British queen, and they have children who all marry British partners, who marry British partners, marry British partners. So it could be that situation, or it actually seems it's just the ancient British bloodline. that it's what was considered to be the sort of where Rome was run from, or at least the western section of it.
Yeah.
So the whole situation is very different to the one that we're presented with.
Well, as you bring that up, Ross, let's talk about this for a minute, because, again, in the Cepher, and I just want to kind of make this point. I know I'm kind of rubbing it in, but I have to rub it in, because we talked about this earlier today when we were on the road. If you read in any English text, you have this notion that has been taught forever that, number one, the Messiah did not contain the corrupt seed of the male DNA from the line of David, because he would be unable to take the throne because of the curse of Jeconiah or Yekoniah. Okay, so we have further evidence of this in Luke 3. In Luke 3, it says that Joseph, the supposed father of the Messiah, then it gives his bloodline, Joseph to his father on back, and that bloodline goes all the way back to Adam, but it goes through Nathan, the son of David. Now, when you get to Matthew 1, we're talking about Joseph, the husband of Mary. Now, I don't know how the supposed father would be different than the husband of Mary, but you have two distinct genealogies. The one in Matthew 1 is a direct descendant of David from Solomon, David through Solomon, down through to the Mashiach. But it says in every English text, Joseph, the husband of Mary. Then when you do the reconciliation or the reckoning of the 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 from David to Jeconiah, 14 from Jeconiah to the birth of the Messiah, you only get 13. The reason being is because there's an error in Matthew 1. Now, if you take the scripture the way it sits in every English text, and you can verify it for yourself, in every English text, you've got a problem, because both Matthew 1 and Luke 3 are talking about the same Joseph. You've got two distinct genealogies, and you're a generation short in Matthew 1. So, and equally true, you cannot point to any relationship between the Messiah and David. There's no DNA relationship between the Messiah and David. But all of that goes away when you realize that what was being discussed there was not her husband, but her father. Now, in the Greek, this becomes logical when you understand that the term being used there is more like guardian, right? So when a woman is married in the ancient world, she would be under the tenor of her father until she's courted by her husband, and her husband comes to her father and says, I have the capability to provide the cover over this woman that you used to provide. The father says, yeah, it looks like you can do that. And so then he relinquishes his cover, and the cover of the husband appears. But if the husband dies, then that cover returns to the father. So we have it looks pretty conspicuous throughout the Gospels that Joseph, the supposed father, was nowhere to be found. And the most likely conclusion is that he had died long time before the adult ministry of the Messiah began, which means that by the time the Gospel of Matthew was written, the true guardian is her father, Joseph, the father of Mary. Now, you recall, who was it that was able to get the body off the cross? It had to be a close relative, and not just a close relative, but most likely the patriarch that could come to say, I'm here to get the body. So we've got two witnesses now pointing to the fact that Joseph of Arimatha was the father of Mary. Now, this becomes important because when you look at the scene around the cross at the death of Mashiach, we see Mary was there with her sister. Now you have Mary, and Mary, right? Mary and Mary Magdalene, and the sister of Mary. Well, the sister of Mary did not have the name Mary. Nobody names two daughters Mary. I mean, maybe they do, but not when they're both still living. Mary and Mary. I mean, how do you call them apart? Mary, it's time for dinner, you know. You know what I mean? So we believe that her name was Anna. And so when Joa makes his appearance here, initially in Cornwall, but also across the Severn into Avalon, where the 12 hides of land were given. So you have this move across into Avalon. When he moves into Avalon, what do you see? He is there with Anna as well as Miriam. Now, if Anna is the one that marries Bran the Blessed, then we begin to see that this same DNA that is the seed of the woman in Miriam is now the seed of the woman in Adam, because it's a direct line to David. The question of whether or not that has scriptural significance is another issue. Now, there are people who will point to a phrase in scripture that says the throne of David will always have someone sitting on it, but not over Judea. Now, take a look at this for just 1 second, Ross, as we talk about this concept. Suppose that Edinburgh is in fact the situs of Jerusalem, right? And that Egypt is not really this area around the Nile, but that is, let's call it sacred Egypt. In other words, this is a portion of Egypt where they built the temples and the monuments, but it's not Egypt per se. But Egypt is some other area. For instance, suppose Egypt was more like Libya, Tunisia, in this area. And in addition to that, when you look at that area, you can see that there is an enormous shelf that is off the coast of northern Africa that is relatively shallow. So if we're dealing with the geography where the oceans were, let's say, 300 feet lower than they are now, in the ancient days, you're talking 3,500 years ago, that the oceans were significantly lower than they are now, say 300 feet lower, northern Africa would have been much larger and likely, possibly even connected into Sicily. So where was the body of water that Moshe crossed? Where was the pillar of fire at day, or the cloud at day and the pillar of fire at night? Was it Mount Etna? I mean, that's the question. Was it Mount Etna that was their guiding light that led them? Was the parting waters not this reed sea that they talk about down here in Israel, but rather this body of water they call the Straits of Messina between Sicily and Italy that allowed Moshe to cross and to move north? We don't know, right? But what we see is this. If Edinburgh was accepted as Jerusalem, and the throne of David is removed from Jerusalem with Jeconiah, so what takes place is, when you see what happens with the kings coming out of Wales, you see the kings move out of Wales, then there is some tenure in northern Wales where they're trying to claim that these kings are the true kings. But there is other evidence that indicates the Welsh kings did a migration completely into Scotland with the intent of resecuring the throne of Jerusalem in between those walls. And this is where we get, from the Maccabees on up to the MacDonalds, on up to Robert the Bruce even, and finally culminating in Yames, right, King James, who would ultimately become the king of the United Kingdom, the first king from Scotland.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of things. I'm going to pick on a couple of things on there which really leap out at me. First of all, is this mention of Anna. I mean, that really solves a problem there, a missing hole, if you like, because when you go through the British records, I was trying to find the family tree to put in front of the screen. I don't think that'll work very well. I could put the graphics up if we can share somehow. But in one of the crucial things is that in this biblical era, the British king is said to have married Anna. And the mystery is, who is Anna? And Wilson Blackett conjecture it might be the sister of Jesus or the auntie of Jesus, or it's not clear who the link is, but the link is clearly very important because this Anna, who's come from somewhere, is clearly identified as part of this holy family. So
interesting. Anna. Yeah, it's
the first time I've not seen Anna mentioned, because I'm not aware of any Anna in the Bible who it could be. We've been trying to work out who that is.
Well, again, it's not. Now, here's one of the problems we run into in Scripture. The New Testament has had the names deleted to protect the innocent. Like, let me give you an example. When you look at the marriage where the water is turned to wine.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Very familiar story. Everybody knows this. Whose marriage was it? Who was it that was getting married, right? Are we told? No one's told, right? When the Mashiach heals the mother-in-law of Kepha, Simon Kepha, Peter, right? What was her name? Oh, we're not going to tell you. When the woman breaks the jar of spikenard over the feet of the Messiah, what's her name? Oh, we're not going to tell you that either. When you get to the demoniac, we're not telling you who he is. Now, I can tell you, when you look closer at this research, and you have to kind of look back through it through the secular side, as I mentioned to you before, there were two competing forces going on. There were the Herodians and there were the Hasmoneans. And the Hasmoneans were the remnant of the Maccabees, And the Maccabees, nowhere in the 4 books of Maccabees do you find any claim that they're of the house of Israel. That claim doesn't appear at all.
Absolutely.
But we do have a claim that is laid out in the book of Genesis discussing the sons of Abraham's brother, Nahor, who had 8 sons by his wife, 4 sons by his concubine. The 4th was whom? Makkah. And so very often you see throughout the tribal history, they call themselves by their tribal leader. So, Abraham called himself by his great-great-grandfather, Hebrew. He called himself Hebrew. He wasn't going to call himself Terakim. He calls himself after his great-grandfather, Hebrew. And similarly, the Jews did not call themselves Jews. They called themselves after Pharez, the second-born son of Judah. So they were Pharisees because they were of Pharez, right? Mm-hmm. And so here we have this group that's calling themselves Maccabees. The Maccabees, they were the son of Makkah, and their tribal heritage was from an area called Hyrcania. Now, Hyrcania today is modern-day Armenia, now currently at war with Azerbaijan, right? But this was Hyrcania. And so you have this area, Hyrcanian. So the Hyrcanians of the tribe of Makkah, who was it that converted everyone to Judaism in the 1st century? John Hyrcanus, John the Hyrcanian, right? Mm-hmm. And so this line, when you get to Herod the Great secures his power over the region by beheading Antigonus, the Hasmonean king at Jericho. Now, when he beheads the Hasmonean king at Jericho, he nonetheless did not stop the family, and the family intermarried thereafter. So one of his daughters, Mariamne III, would marry the son of Antigonus, who was Aristobulus IV. So Mariamne marries Aristobulus IV. Her daughter becomes the wife of Simon Peter, Kepha. And so when Mashiach is healing the mother-in-law of Simon Peter, he's healing a Herodian, daughter of Herod, Mariamne III. So when you see this now, you can see that Peter is married into the Herodians and he's married into the Hasmoneans. He's married into both families. And Aristobulus IV would have 2 notable sons. One of his sons would be named Matthias. He would be the 13th apostle, the apostle that would replace Judas Iscariot, would be Matthias. But Matthias, of course, he was known by his last name, Bar Aristobulus. Matthias Bar Aristobulus, which was shortened to Matthias Barnabas. Barnabas, the associate of Paul. Mm-hmm. Whose grave is, interestingly enough, in a 1st century Byzantine fort called Ognios Apsaros near Batumi in Georgia. I've visited that gravesite. So the other son, the brother of Matthias Barnabas, is Aristobulus V, who becomes the first anointed bishop in Britain, having come to Britain with the family that attended with Joseph of Arimathea. He and Eli, the other grandfather, the father of Joseph, the husband, when you look at in the English scripture, he's called Heli, right? The last name in the lineage in Luke 3, Heli. And so you read it as Heli, you think, oh yeah, Heli, we don't know whatever happened to him, but that wasn't his name. That's his Greekified, anglicized name. His real name was Eli, like Eliyahu or Elisha, Elijah or Elisha, Eli. Now, when you recognize this name, now look at what happened on the cross. Eli, Eli, why have you forsaken me? Now we're told this is Yahusha, the Mashiach, crying out to God in heaven. God in heaven, why have you forsaken me? But he wasn't forsaken. No one takes my life from me. I lay my life down willingly.
Yes.
Now all of a sudden, Eli, Eli, why have you forsaken me? No, he's talking about his grandfather. Eli, Eli, why aren't you here? Why are you here? Joseph of Arimatha is here. Why aren't you here? Eli, Eli, why have you forsaken me? So I believe it was Eli that traveled with Joseph of Arimatha to the situs we saw today, right? Which is that when you talk about who is Ilid in the first century record here in Wales, I believe that was Eli. Eli, the grandfather, Ilid here in Wales.
It could be, yeah. I mean, there's quite a few things you covered on now. So bring this, Where Jesus is Buried, one of the books we published by Wilson and Blackett, because it's amazing how much of what you just spoke about is covered in this. It's very familiar ground, because you've got the work of Josephus giving what this book does is give the political background to what's going on at the time. So the things you talk about, like you've got the Macs, as you call them here, got the Maccabees, then you've got the Edomians, the Herodians, who's marrying who, and there's being put together now trying to put together a family chart of Herod's family. That's fun, I tell you, because everyone's marrying everybody there, you know? And so that was the first point on that. You can see the politics of that and how it comes together. And the point made in this book, which I think is similar or related to what you're saying there, is that when we're talking about the Messiah, the Jesus character, is that he is of noble descent. It's not some poor person in a stable. This is a dynastic thing. And what we're trying to work out here is that the proposal here, and what are your views on the fact of him being, well, two things I'd like to ask you, two questions I'd like to ask you, is one in here is an attempt to track down the missing father you're talking about, and the possibility of that being Joseph Pantera, who was a soldier, and the grave's being found, and there seems to be some evidence he was away on campaign. This is why he's an absent father. And that would tie in with what you were saying then about Joseph Arimathea becoming the new guardian, because he's effectively the patriarch of the family. The question about Egypt as well is that in the Collins Beaumont, I think he makes Egypt in Ireland, and I've got someone else I deal with who has got it in Cornwall. So the Corn Wall, this is the wall around the corn, so you can play with that. And there's one of the things I was going to ask you then, sorry, was that, yeah, you mentioned Peter being Herodian there. One of the talks I was giving last week from the information in this book was that Paul was a member of the Herodian dynasty. And you can see that he's got noble birth because he's walking in and out of palaces and talking to everybody. And this will also explain why his claim for Roman citizenship. So have you got any thoughts on that?
Ross,
Oh, no, one other question. I'll put another question on. You just give one more question. You know, with the wedding with the wine to water, Wilson and Blackett look at that. Isn't it the situation, or is it the possibility that the person who's expected to provide the wine when it runs out is the host? And the host of the wedding would be the father of the groom, and that Jesus would be the father of the person getting married. This is one of the things being proposed here, that Jesus would be married and he would therefore have children.
Yeah, but in this case, the host comes to him and says, where did we get this good wine? Normally...
Oh, we've lost sound. Hello, can anyone hear me? It's all gone quiet. Is it just me? We lost you a minute there, Stephen, and we've lost everyone except me now. Do you want to just say something?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now, Ross?
Oh, yeah, yes, very loud now, yes.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay, good.
Like the voice of God, then he came crashing in on me very loud, yes.
There.
Yes, that's
I've
it.
got the voice going, yeah.
Ray Charlton Heston, yes.
So a couple of things you see. I mean, one you see is, of course, that there is the host present. The host is present. So he's the one that says to Mashiach, look, where'd we get this good wine? Because normally we serve the good wine first and the rot gut second, but this is far better wine than what we had before. So that's an interesting indication. Now, there's some real anomalies here when you talk about Paul. Let's talk about Paul for a minute. They're really difficult stuff. Because with Paul, he says, I am a Benjamite and a Pharisee, right? I'm a Benjamite and a Pharisee. Well, number one, I don't know anybody could claim to be a Benjamite after the story at the end of the book of Judges. When you get into Judges 17 and 18, every Benjamite male and every Benjamite female was wiped out, and the children were intermarried with non-Benjamite people, with non-house of Israel people. But yet Paul is calling himself a Benjamite. Okay, so let's see if that's the case. Well, interestingly enough, at Capernaum, Capernaum, it was called, this was being ruled. Go ahead. Good question.
Sorry, I think we're Jessica. You might be picking up Dr. Pidgeon on your microphone. You suddenly get a big echo.
Should be all right now.
You okay, Ross?
Yes. Sorry, you were just echoing a bit. I think you're okay now. Yes.
Okay. So at Capernaum, we had the head Benjamite, this Benjamite rabbi who was very prestigious, who was the leader of the synagogue at Capernaum. Now, as far as I can put together, and again, this is all theoretical, but as far as I can put together, I believe that the situation was, now, Capernaum has a close proximity to Migdal. And you have this Benjamite running this synagogue. Okay. Now, I believe he was likely the father of Paul. But he was an elderly man. So Paul was born, relatively young. This man became an elderly man. And then way down, maybe 20 years after Paul was born, he has another daughter. And this daughter is what they call Mary Magdalene, Mary of Migdal. So you have the bishop living, or this rabbi, well, he wasn't a rabbi, but he was the head of the synagogue. He's living in Migdal, a close proximity to Capernaum. He's teaching at Capernaum as a Benjamite. But Paul ends up with a substantially younger sister, substantially younger. And the old man dies, and his mother marries someone else. She marries, now maybe this is what happened, that the old man died, the mother, Paul's mother, marries a Roman centurion. And from this is where we get Mary Magdalene. I mean, I don't know. I mean, but it appears to be, we're going this way because Paul has a great hatred for Mashiach and all of those things that come out of that area. And he's zealous to prosecute and to kill anyone who would follow that. And I think a lot of that had to do with now. So it's my theory that Mary of Migdal was married to Eleazar. And Eleazar is the disciple whom the Mashiach loved, right? Now, I've read many, many theories by people who are quite good at this, that it wasn't John, Yochanan, that wrote the Gospel of John, but rather Eleazar who wrote the Gospel of John. And we have post-crucifixion evidence of that because it is Eleazar and Mary Magdalene who are doing the evangelizing in Marseille and really up the center of France all the way to Lyon. I mean, there's a pretty good body of evidence that Mary Magdalene and Eleazar were the ones doing this proselytizing. Now, I know it doesn't answer the question that Muslim proposes, that was Jesus, was Yahusha married? I know that's a big question. That's a significant question. Was he married? But for the sake of this discussion, let's say he wasn't. Then we can look at this and say, okay, we have Mary of Migdal married to Eleazar. They are evangelizing in central France. You have Joseph of Arimatha and the families, including Simon the Zealot, here in Britain. Now, Simon the Zealot, I think there's a reason why Simon the Zealot was so zealous. In the Gospel or in the New Testament, you have a discussion that says Judas Iscariot was the son of Shimon, the son of Simon. Which Simon? There were two disciples, Simon Kepha and Simon the Zealot. Now, in both cases, both of these two gentlemen were looking for a political battlefield king. They were looking for a king like Judas Maccabeus to come and push the Herodians out of power, to push the Romans out, and to establish again the independent state. That's what they were looking for. They were looking for a man of violence. Very clear. When Mashiach says, I'm going to be the suffering servant who's going to die, no, that's not going to be you. You're going to be the king that's going to conquer. And what does Mashiach say to him? Get behind me, Satan. You don't know what you're talking about, right? So Judas Iscariot, Peter's son, or Simon the Zealot? Well, you've got good evidence it could have been either one. Simon the Zealot would then go on to come to Britain and would, he couldn't shut his mouth. Finally, they executed him because he wouldn't stop evangelizing people.
Right.
He said, do you know the word? Simon, we've heard it from you. Be quiet, And but he was part of the group that came with JOA to these islands. So this kind of, when you start to construct this, we begin to see that there is something that's totally disproportional that's being taught in the church. He wasn't a little poor shepherd kid who had no money, that mom and dad had to go up to Nazareth on the back of a mule, or up to Bethlehem on the back of a mule when she was 9 months pregnant. And they had to stay over there in the barn because there wasn't, when you come to Jerusalem during Sukkot, every male in the country was supposed to be in that town for that time. So how's he supposed to find a place? I mean, I was in Jerusalem during Sukkot, and yes, we could not find any place. We couldn't go in. There was no place we could go for lunch. We ended up in Bethlehem because we couldn't get lunch in Jerusalem because the place was jam-packed with people. So literally, one of these guys looks at us and says, well, we can't eat here. Let's go to Bethlehem. That's exactly what happened. We went through that story. And he wasn't raised in a manger, like you're told. He went into a sukkot, a booth, a sukkah. He was in a booth. That's where he was, a sukkah. So it's not so, this business of he was poor. His mother was of the royal family of David. His father was of the royal family of David. They weren't poor. And the disciples themselves were well placed in the Herodians, well placed in the Hasmoneans. And Paul himself, having studied with Hillel the elder, Gamaliel, who was a member of the Sanhedrin, who knew Joseph of Arimatha personally. They were both Sanhedrin at the same time. Mm-hmm. Paul was extremely fluent in Hebrew. How fluent in Hebrew? When he was accused of an offense for which he was going to get the death penalty, he spoke to them in Hebrew. Now, imagine for a second, Ross, that you've been accused of committing a murder and you're in Madrid, Spain. You're going to defend yourself in Spanish?
No, of course not. No, of course not.
You wouldn't do it.
No.
Not unless it was your native tongue. And so Paul was speaking in his native tongue, which was Hebrew, defending himself. So we get a completely different story now when we begin to look at this lineage of who these people were. Well-placed people in the middle of this whole mix between the Herodians and the Hasmoneans and the Romans. And ultimately out of this, we see that this is born. Now, with this faith being born in this respect, now let's go back to the British kings for a minute. We talk about Constantine. But when you look at the line of Bran the Blessed, Coel and Caradoc, right? And the son of Caradoc, Lucius, also called Linus. And you recall that Caradoc was taken captive and held in a house in Britain, right? But when you get to that house in Britain, all of these names are being listed in the book of Romans. So here, who's Paul writing to in Rome? He's writing to the British house that is being held in captivity in Rome. That's who he's talking. All those names he's talking about are those people.
Timothy, 2 Timothy at the very end.
We know
Prudence, Claudia, Linus, they're all listed in 2 Timothy when he signs the letter off. He mentions the British royals. That's who he's talking to. So my greetings to them, yes.
And so as we go through, now what do we see? Hold on just one second, Ross. I want to make sure that we don't get any feedback. Just 1 second. I can take care of this.
Sounding good now, yes.
Go ahead.
No, you just turn yourself off. Nope. Can't hear you now.
Yep, you should be able to
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now you're back on.
Can you hear me now? Yes.
Back on now, yes. I missed my chance.
I know. I mean, yeah, you did. Yes, you did. Okay, well, I'm going to shut up here in just a second. But the thing is, when you look at the family line there, we see that it is a grandson of Brand the Blessed, who is named the first bishop of Rome, Lucius. And this is Lucius Luke of the Gospel of Luke, of the book of Acts, who wrote 2 Corinthians, and who probably wrote the book of Hebrews, all being written by Luke, who was a highly educated, very articulated Greek speaker, Latin speaker, and whatever the language was here in Silesia. He was speaking all of these languages, and very articulated, very eloquent. They called him a doctor, but he wasn't a doctor. He was a healer. He was a healer. And it wasn't Peter that was the first bishop of Rome. I mean, This is hard evidence that it was not Peter, the first bishop of Rome. It was Linus or Lucius, or however you want to put it. And in addition to that, Peter never came to Rome. He died down in what we could know is now modern day Cairo. It was called Fortress Babylon. That's where he died. He never set foot in Rome. The whole story of him being in Rome is this nonsense created of a 3rd century Gnostic work about the 2 Peters, one who was flying around Rome, right? Okay, enough of me.
Yeah. This. I mean, very much what I was talking about on Sunday. This is that a lot of these are the themes in this book here about Peter. That was there's a chapter here, the myth of Peter going to Rome, the myth of the whole point is there's no way he could have got there if you look at the timelines. He just wouldn't have lived long enough. And also, if you look at who was appointed, you got James the Just taking over from I gotta say it the way you say it, Hoshea. So James the Just comes into the picture. You've got Linus, because Paul seems to wanted to infiltrate into become a disciple or become part of this Christian group, and he can't get in. This is the problem. This is when this whole we got 2 great stories, and we got the Road to Damascus story, and then you've got the story of Peter seeing Jesus on his way back to Rome to be crucified again. All these things seem to have been fictional stories that were invented in the sort of 2nd century. And as one writer put it, because he was called on it, and his stories were untrue, but he did it for the love of Paul. He wrote these stories for the love of Paul. This whole narrative was built. It was created to give the basis for there being a Roman church, and to build up these characters that we know now as the sort of the main characters of Christianity as it's presented to us today.
And of course, when you look at this, now look at what Rome asserts, okay? Rome will tell you, okay, Paul was beheaded by Nero in Rome. Peter was crucified upside down in Rome. And the Roman cross is all about it. Now, just think about this, Ross. Suppose that the death penalty at that time was being done on the electric chair, okay? Would you go into a church that has the altar here and the electric chair hanging on the wall behind it? What's the point of that electric chair being up there? Well, this is the assertion of Rome. Look, we killed the Son of God, and we killed his top 2 disciples. We killed Peter, we killed Paul. Therefore, we have the authority. We are God on earth, vicarious filio Dei. We are Rome. We're the ones that did this. We're the ones that killed him and his 2 top disciples. But the fact is that Paul, when you read in the Cepher, we have the lost chapter of the Acts, chapter 29.
Really? That's an interesting subject in itself, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Sonini manuscript discovered during the time of Louis XVI at the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, right? This is where he discovered this manuscript. He brings it back, and he's going to present it to the court, Louis XVI. But Louis XVI is about to be beheaded. So what does he do? He does like every other writer. He takes his manuscript to Ireland, where the Irish will sequester the manuscript and keep it safe. And it's not rediscovered until the late 1880s and initially translated to find out Paul left Rome. He left Rome, he went to Spain, and we have the record of it now. He went to Spain and appointed bishops in Sevilla and in Cordova, and he had 5 or 6 bishops in Spain. He came here to Britain. Now, when he came here to Britain, we see that we have this establishment going on here in Cardiff, through Cardiff, the place of the agreement. We have this establishment going on. We have an establishment of this trade route over through Cornwall, over the top, and into the islands. And we see this establishment of the throne here, right, on this side, the western side of Britain.
Just to explain to people the geography. I mean, you've got, if they're not so aware of it, the bottom corner of Britain, so you've got Cornwall sticking down, and you've got Wales, like this. And what we have here is this is the Severn Estuary. So although it seems like Cornwall and Wales are very separate, they're two sides of the same estuary. They're the same people, and it's the crisscrossing back and forth is easier than walking long distances. So that the links between Cornwall and Wales were extremely strong and remain to this day. You've got the Cornish language, which is very similar to Cymraeg. They're trying to restore Cernu as well. So it sounds once you understand the geography, you can see how it's more feasible, because this Severn Estuary was the main trade route. Even at the start of the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th century, in recent times, you go to where the first Colville and all these places, the first Brunel built his first iron bridge. They're all on the Severn. It's not the Thames. The Thames takes you to Northern Europe. It's the Severn is the gateway to the Mediterranean, Brittany, Northwest France, Spain. That's the way you do it. Like World War II, the D-Day invasions, they set off from the South Wales because that's the route. So it might not be obvious when you look at a map, but this is the joining up. Exactly what you're saying there. These are the main trade routes. This is how you get in and out of the places.
Yeah, and so you can see why civilization would develop on this side of the island.
Yes.
Even on the east coast of the island, where it's flat, not very defendable. There's very little mountainous terrain, very little high ground to get when you're
in those days. Yeah, it had probably been heavily wooded. It hadn't been drained yet. It was difficult. In the long run, after you learned the techniques and spent the time draining all the fields and cutting all the trees down and building vast amounts of large fields of food, great. In the early days, you did not want to be in east of England. It was low-lying, marshy, tree-ridden swamps. It was not a good place to be.
Yeah. And so what happens when Paul comes in? Does he come in through Cornwall? No, he doesn't come in through Cornwall. He instead enters the land through Falmouth. He's much farther to the east. He enters the land through Falmouth, and he heads up towards Mount Lune in London to preach, according to Acts 29. Right,
and it's still St. Paul's, the main cathedral of London is St. Paul's.
Why is it
St. Paul? Yeah.
And so it's a very interesting evidence here that we see. Now we've got some competing visions going on. You have James the Just in Jerusalem, who's leading one idea of thought. You have Simon Kepha, who's down in Cairo, what they call Fortress Babylon. He's leading another train of thought. Now this train of thought would become dominant in Alexandria, Egypt, become very dominant. And the church would be looking at what's going on in Alexandria. And then, of course, there was the reach into Antioch, Cappadocia, and of course, which Antioch, right? 5 or 6 Antiochs, which one was it, right? And we have the 7 churches in Western Turkey, Ephesus, Smyrna, Philadelphia, and so on and so forth, Pergamum, and where Paul had this outreach. But we can see that there was competing doctrine going on. And ultimately, all of this doctrine would be subsumed by the Council of Nicaea under the tenure of Constantine, who had military victories under the Chi Rho, the P and the X, the Chi Rho, that symbol. And because he had those military, and he was using that term as Christos. But this became Christos, and they went to the Christos in honor of the idea of Krishna, because they wanted to have an international reach into the Hindu world. So we saw today, Ross, some incredible evidence out of Margam. Some incredible evidence we saw. And one, of course, the controversial stone that Alan Wilson talks about, that we were looking at. And as we looked at it, Paul was looking at it and saying, well, this, we see some Paleo-Ivrit here. You could try to construe it as Latin, but it would be very unusual. Misspelled words, left out words, letters missing, names inferred, and construct kind of inferred to it to say this is Latin. And we could see evidence of the Paleo-Ivrit, which would also point to the Colburn alphabet.
Yeah, I just want to interrupt a second and say it was brilliant today. Absolutely fascinating to
just
see.
Just explain more about that, please.
Look at that writing was absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
Can you both explain a bit more about, because that was fascinating. You're talking about the Zeus, right? The name that we saw there, and predating Constantine. For a novice like me, I'm just totally dumbfounded by that. I'd love you to explain that more, please.
Well, we came upon a stone. We wanted to see some stones to look for evidence of the pre-existing alphabet here, the Colbrin, and what they call the Colbrin. But it's kind of this. It's a derivative alphabet of the Etruscan alphabet, the Hittite alphabet, which is an extension of Paleo-Ivrit. And the Paleo-Ivrit, just to give a little bit of background, the initial 10 Commandments were written by the finger of Yah himself, and this was a pictographic Paleo-Ivrit. They call it the pictograph. It's pictographic Paleo-Ivrit that evolved into a more concretized form of Paleo-Hebrew or Paleo-Ivrit. Now, the Paleo-Ivrit is the language of the kingdom of Yahud, that would be David's kingdom, until the Babylonian captivity. Now, once the Babylonian captivity happens, you can see this in the historical record in the Dead Sea Scrolls. You go from the Paleo-Ivrit to this Aramaic block script over a period of 400 years. So by the time you get to the 1st century BC, they pretty much moved into Aramaic block script, or what we call modern Hebrew today. The vowel points, the Nikudot, they do not appear at all until we get to the 8th century AD, when the Masoretes would begin to add the vowel points. So when you see a text like the Hebrew text that's a resident at the University of Cambridge, there's a Hebrew text of the entirety of Scripture in Hebrew, no Masoretic vowel points. So it tells us this predates the 7th century, and for it to have a New Testament, it's post 2nd century. Very important work, right? But what we see here is we come to look at this stone, this one particular stone, and the stone was anomalous. So they have a set of writings up here on the poster saying this is what it says in Latin. And then we look at the stone, and the stone is, well, no, actually, that letter is not that letter isn't that, and that letter is not that, and that. And instead,
it was shockingly blatant, wasn't it? Sorry to jump in, but it was shockingly blatant. That the picture,
absolutely.
the letters on the picture, and the danger is that the real stone is gradually wearing away. I don't know how it can wear away inside a museum. It should be protected, but it is. It's getting worse all the time. And people are going to rely more and more on the picture. But at the moment, if you do it, was brilliant to see it with Dr. Pidgeon, was to see, hang on a second, this isn't the same. It's not a case it's translated incorrectly. The words they are translating from have not even been written down correctly. It's a double whammy. You take an extreme example, an X and an N, write it down as a J and an H, and then get the translation of the J and the H wrong. It's that bad. It's appalling. It's fascinating to watch Dr. Pidgeon and Paul as well explaining what these different letters actually more likely were, and how he'd read them, and then how you translate them. And it was totally different to what was put up there.
And of course, one of the big things that this would really kind of mess things up, if you will, the Paleo-Ivrit is read right to left, whereas the Latin is read left to right. This is very, very important, because now when you begin to look at this word, if you're reading it right to left, you're getting an entirely different inference from what's being said there. And one of the letters really struck me, Ross, the one that really struck me as being completely non-Roman entirely, was the letter that had the flat top on it, and then it came down and it had a circle underneath it. So you had the top and then the line down and the circle. What Roman letter is that?
Yeah, it's not Latin at all, is it? Yeah.
That's not a Latin letter, but that was clearly what was in the stone. And so when you read the relief above it, they've had letters in parentheses and a bunch of other stuff that say, well, this means this and means that. Well, it might mean that if you had it spelled correctly, but it's not spelled correctly. It's not spelled completely. There's a letter missing, and it doesn't mean that at all. And then, but we did see evidence of the paleo construct. For instance, the J. Now, this is another thing. The J in Latin, there wasn't a J in Latin. If you
not very Welsh either, funny enough, yeah. So
when you talk about Julius Caesar, you go back and look at the ancient record, Iulius, and they didn't call it Judea, they called it Eudea. And when they put it, what's it say in the Latin version of the Jesus, King of the Jews. INRI. Does it say JNRJ? Jesus of Nazareth, Rex Judea? No, it doesn't. INRI. Jesu Nazari Rex Judea. They did not have a J. There was no Julius Caesar. There was no Judea. There was no Jesus. It was Jesu Nazari Rex Judea. Very important. So what's this J doing on there? Well, in the Paleo-Hebrew, we know exactly what letter that was. That's a Paleo-Hebrew letter. And so when
It's not a J at all. It's something else, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's something else entirely. Now, so what we see here is so we've got a couple of hard indicators that this looks like it had some very serious paleo. But there were a couple of letters that were, I don't know, lowercase Latin. Have you ever heard of lowercase Latin?
No, it's got to be in gloss, isn't it? It's got to be in uppercase. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, so there were just a ton of anomalies on this stone that didn't appear to give evidence of Latin, but rather gave evidence of it was either some kind of crude, vulgar dog Latin that was misspelled horribly and done just pathetically, or it was an ancient language, a disparate language, a language that would be the derivative language, not of Latin, but rather of the Paleo-Ivri, similar to the Hittite expression, the Etruscan expression, or the Colburn expression. Mm-hmm. So that's what. Now, one of the things we found on that stone.
So just to say on that, using the Colburn process and methods, and what is most nearest to modern Welsh, should we put it that way, rather than saying it was Welsh, the nearest living descendant is Welsh Cymraeg. You can also read Etruscan, which is quite fascinating, and it just reads really well every time. So that the connection there is the Colburn and the Etruscan are pretty much the same. And as you said, the Etruscan reads right to left, which is interesting as well.
Yeah, it's extremely fascinating that we would see this linkage now. And this is a linkage that that appears to come out of through the Hittite Empire, through the Lombardy, the Etruscan area, and then into the Isles. So again, the alphabets don't lie. That's what's so important about it. When you see the glyphs tell you when and where and who. They don't lie. They tell you when, where, and who. So very important stuff, and that we're finding there. Now, in addition to that, we found something I thought was very, very interesting. And this is what you're bringing up, Jesse, is we saw the name that they were inferring at the bottom of the stone as Jesus. And they had it spelled little e, which didn't appear on the stone at all. And then we had SEUS.
Yeah.
Right? Now, from my point of view, this is hard evidence that they determined to use Zeus as the moniker. And in fact, when you say Asus, you would be talking about from Zeus. From Zeus. Now, without getting too far into it, the whole idea of Zeus and his children, Zeus having relations with human women who would produce progeny who were half God, half man, right? In the scripture, they're referred to as Nephilim. Yes. Nephilim. And so Zeus would be a fallen watcher. A fallen watcher. So for Constantine to say, we're going to go with this name from Zeus to describe this person whose birth name was in Hebrew Yahusha, we're going to describe him as from Zeus, Jesus. So this could not be countenanced by the time you get to Yames, or by the time you get to Miles Coverdale, or by the time you get to anything. By the time we arrive in post-enlightenment, they're not going to be laying Zeus on the table. However, in the 1611 KJV in the New Testament, there is a reference to Elijah as Eli Zeus, which is kind of this remnant where they're laying it out there saying, oh, yeah, we are going to use the word Zeus, right? So when you see this construct now, you can begin to see that Constantine is looking to put everything in the soup bowl. Let's put Dagon in there. We'll have, eat fish on Friday, and the Pope can wear the fish hat. And let's put Ishtar in there. We'll call her fertility feast Easter. Let's put Nimrod in there. We'll call his fertility rite the winter solstice festival, Christmas. And let's put in Dagon. Let's put in Baal. Let's put in Molech. Let's put in this. And let's fold in all of the, and let's put in Zeus, because after all, this is Greece. And so they fold this all into a singularity, and the singularity is disparate from the faith that is practiced here on the Isle of Avalon in Silesia for almost 400 years, free of that Roman construct.
Brilliant, yes.
So for the remainder of the program, this is important, Stephen, because people want to connect with you while you are here in the United Kingdom. And I'm getting messages coming through. Can you please explain the remainder of your trip? So what the purpose is of you moving from Wales to Ireland to Glastonbury to whatever you have on your itinerary, and how that is going to shape your ministry when you return to America and in what you impart to the people. That's come up quite a couple of times. They want to walk with you, but they can't literally because they can't see these videos until we release them. But they really want to know more, Stephen.
Okay, well, let me say this. First of all, it's very important for me to come alongside Ross in Ross's studies in Wales. You know, the video you did the other night, Ross, was just explosively good, I thought. Just an incredible video.
Thank you very much, yes.
And Tim was such a blessing to be with us today, too, as well. You know, his brother, his great brother. And, you know, so this exploration in Wales is really critical to it. Now, we had to go to Glastonbury because Glastonbury is the situs that has counterfeited the true story of the ecclesia, or the called out assembly in the Isles. So Glastonbury, it all happened here. King Arthur was here, and Guinevere was here, and the Round Table was here, and Joseph of Arimatha was here, yes. Blah, 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 blah. And almost all of it is baloney. It was all constructed to build this fabulous abbey. That was an abbey belonging to Rome, by the way. You know, that's why the abbeys are ruined right now, because they refused to give it up, and Henry VIII burned it to the ground and then killed the last abbot there. So what you see here is the real truth has to be hidden, buried. Oh, we dug it up, bury it again, dig it in. You know, cover that gravestone with concrete so we can't see the name on it, right? All of these things happen, and this history is going away very quickly. So the work of Wilson and Blackett, and as Ross has picked it up and is continuing to pursue it and being published doing it, we're getting the true story. Now, what is the purpose of this true story? Because in Britain now and in Europe, we have something happening. We have this crash of Europe that's going on right now. And it's a crash of Europe orchestrated by a bunch of poisoned people, totally corrupted people who can't do anything except cause the fall of Europe. And what is the answer? The question, I mean, when we were in Glastonbury, we were talking to people on the streets. What do we do? What do we do? But you have to remember that the true faith here began here. The true faith had its origin here. And because it had its origin here, you see this push between the true faith here and then Rome's assertion over the top of it. Then the true faith would come up, and then Rome would come and crush it. Then the true faith would push back, and then Rome would come back and crush it again. Until you get to Henry VIII, where Henry says, look, get your Roman stuff out of here. And after he did that, you still had Charles I trying to bring Catholicism back in. You had James II trying to bring it back in. You had one person after another trying to reinstate Rome over the Isles. Now, the EU was the last attempt of Rome to assert itself over the Isles. Let's all get into the EU together. Give up your currency and let us, the sons and daughters of the Third Reich, manage your affairs. And of course, you know, Nigel Farage and others have said, no, I think we're going to cop out of that one. I thought we won World War II, not you. And so we had the Brexit, and the Brexit was an extremely powerful event, in my opinion, the hand of Yah, working to once again separate the people from Rome. Now, the separation from Rome, now, believe me, I'm going to be here in Catholic Ireland here in just a few days, and we're going to be visiting the tomb of Jeremiah. But you see, it is no longer about Catholic and Protestant. It's no longer about the Westminster Confession. It's no longer about any of that. What it is, when Henry VIII, like you mentioned in your show the other night, Ross, Henry VIII claimed he was reforming the church, not creating something new, but reforming what had been here before. And it's the same thing that we're doing here. Now we're coming back and we're saying, look, we have new information that was not known at the time of the KJV. Had they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls at the time of the King James Bible?
No.
They had not discovered that. So because of this, we get this evidence from the KJV, from the Dead Sea Scrolls that have to be updated to the scripture, especially since Jude's going to quote the book of Enoch. So this is why the Cepher is as inclusive as it is. It includes all of the books that were in the KJV AV, which included the Apocrypha, which was included in 1560 Geneva, and the Great Bible, the most important Bible in Britain's history, which was the 1539 Coverdale Great Bible. Also included the Apocrypha. We've just updated it. We've included the works that should have been included that were lost. That's what's happened with the Cepher. And so what we're doing here is this. Number one, we're casting out witchcraft.
Mm-hmm. Very important.
So here we were sitting on the altar in the Glastonbury Abbey. Paul Barry was blowing the shofar, and we were declaring the name of Yahweh over the Glastonbury Abbey. Because Yahweh is far greater than any witchcraft, wizardry, spell casting nonsense. The witchcraft is no answer to anybody's problem anywhere at any time. The true answer is Yah, the way, the truth, and the life. And so we're going to be bringing this message that there is no distinction between the Protestant and the Catholic. There is the true way, the truth, and the life. That's what really exists. You have to find it. You have to come out of Babylon. You have to leave the trappings that you were clinging to before, leave them behind, and embrace the entirety of a faith that was originally brought here to Britain. This is why, tomorrow we're going up to Aberfan. We're going to pray over the situs of the great destruction in Aberfan where all the children were lost. Because no person should ever set foot in Wales without recognizing the loss of those children at Aberfan. Period. Henry Groover did it, and we're not going to come to Wales and not acknowledge that loss. It's just not going to happen. Then we're going to go see some other important sites. We're going out to the situs in Western Wales where this Valley of Mashiach apparently was. We've got to go look at this evidence. We have to see what's there. From there, we'll be traveling into Ireland. We're going to visit some great brothers and sisters out in the Galway area. And we're going to be, again, discussing the emergence of what? The Torah community, the emergence of the totality of the Torah, the children of Yasharel. The children of Yasharel in the Isles. Then we'll be coming back to Dublin. Then we're going to be coming to the very important Isle of Anglesey. We're going to be coming to the Isle of Anglesey. Very important. We're going to be spending some time there. Then we're coming in, of course, to Lutterworth and Rugby. Yeah. And we're going to be doing the conference. We're going to be celebrating the Feast of Trumpets in Lutterworth. Very important event. And at the Feast of Trumpets, we're going to be dealing with the proclamation. We're going to be proclaiming the name, number one. We're going to be proclaiming the name. And in addition to proclaiming the name, we're going to be blowing the shofars. And there will be baptisms in the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. And it's going to be very powerful. And then from there, we're going to be attending some other sites. And so for the most part, after we're done with the conference, we're pretty much going to be on our own, okay? But I can tell you, we will be putting up as much as we can. We're going to put up as much information as we can. And Ross and I have got a couple of interviews. We've got some interviews at the JOA grave. And Ross, you also were able to tape some things, and I think Stuart was able to capture some things. And so those videos are going to be coming out piece by piece as we look at these historic events and this history that we're seeing that is so vital and alive. But just like that site we were at this afternoon where they excavated it and buried it, excavated it and buried it, believe me, the impetus around here is to bury the truth of these things, to bury it. And we're not here to bury it. We're here to unbury it.
Well, we're at our time. I don't want to keep our precious viewers today. We've extended it for half an hour because you can't do much in an hour at all. But there's so many important things here. And I know there's new things as well that have been concepts that have been explained for the first time to many. And so you have to weigh that, you have to chew it, investigate it, and some really intriguing information. And then hearing about the mission and declaring his name. That excites me. The Feast of Trumpets being very significant, and us getting together and fellowshipping and seeing this develop. I want to thank Dr. Pidgeon for, it's wonderful to be in the same room, in the same country, all three of us being in Wales today. That's quite significant. And for this program and seeing the shape of things to come, because there is far more. Ross, I want to thank you for being a guest here today. It's been wonderful getting to know you and working with you this week, and hearing so much from Stephen and Stuart about you and what we're doing tomorrow. And I ask people just to go to your website, the Britain's Hidden History. That's your channel, where you can also find programs that you've done in multiples with Stephen, so that they can catch up and get the history and get a background to this. And I want to thank you for joining us today on our new platform. A few technical issues. It's so difficult when you have a new platform, but we will straighten these things out. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for being here today. All the messages, so excited, just wanting to know what Stephen and Stephanie Pidgeon are up to. I'm always updating them with your love and your affection and your messages. And thank you for walking with us at this time. So we will see you on Friday. Scott Bennett is going to be presenting that program. And Dr. Pidgeon, if he is landed in a place and he has a signal, then he will be a guest there also. Lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us. Shalom for now, and take care. All the best.
Two people laughed. Two people cried. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Ever seen a blind man cross the road, trying to make the other side, baby? Ever seen a young girl growing old, trying to make herself a bride? So what becomes of you, my love?
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Pray that he's still out there. Somewhere.